And Mark Carney continues to go out of his way to make sure that Canada and the US are separated, and Canada continues to be antagonistic towards the US. Listen to his statements here.
The United States is no longer treating Canada like a protected partner, and Mark Carney is the reason this relationship is breaking apart. For decades, Canada benefited from special access to the American market, shared defense systems, integrated energy networks, and a level of patience most countries never received. Carney acted as though those advantages were permanent. Washington is now showing him they were not.
This is the man who promised Canadians their leader would have his elbows up, and this country now watches those elbows drop every single time the pressure is actually real.
This is not about the US suddenly cutting every military phone line or abandoning the border overnight. The protection being removed is broader and more dangerous. Canada is losing the economic shelter that came with being America's closest neighbor. Tariff-free access, trusted supply chains, preferred treatment, investment confidence, and easy movement of Canadian goods are all being weakened because Ottawa turned cooperation into confrontation.
Mark Carney capitulated and dropped the digital services tax. Ladies and gentlemen, this broke today. Trade negotiations revive proposed steel and aluminum exports quota in return for lower U.S. tariffs.
Carney built his political image around standing up to Washington. He told Canadians that his government would keep its elbows up, protect national sovereignty, and refuse to bend. But every time the pressure became real, Ottawa backed away. The digital services tax was dropped. New tariff threats were paused. Retaliatory tariffs were removed. Canada kept surrendering, but the U.S. did not restore the protection Carney had already damaged.
Trade negotiators are reviving a proposal that would see Canadian steel and aluminum exports subject to a quota system in return for lower U.S. levies on the metals, as the clock ticks down on President.
Now, Canadian steel and aluminum may be pushed into a quota system just to receive lower tariffs. Before this conflict, these products could enter the American market without those barriers. Under the new proposal, even exports inside the quota could face tariffs between 10 and 15%. Anything above the limit could face tariffs as high as 25 to 50%. That is not protection. That is controlled access.
Under the framework, Canadian steel and aluminum would be subject to tariff rate quotas or TRQs, the sources said. This would mean that only a certain amount of the Canadian metals could be exported to the US before an exorbitant tariff would take effect.
A quota would place a ceiling on Canadian industrial growth. A steel company could improve production, win more orders, and become more competitive, only to discover that selling additional metal into the US triggers punishing tariffs. Washington would effectively decide how much Canadian steel can enter its market at a manageable cost. Carney promised independence, but his failures have given America greater control over Canadian industry.
Carney has no surplus and therefore no wealth to put in such a fund. He's talking about a sovereign debt fund. He wants to put another $25 billion on the national credit card to gamble on a liberal slush fund that will enrich liberal insiders at the expense of hardworking Canadians.
The same danger hangs over aluminum and automobiles. Canadian-made vehicles are already facing a 25% tariff, while detailed negotiations may drag into 2027. Factories cannot plan years ahead when nobody knows whether their largest market will remain open. Companies delay hiring, postpone investments, and move production closer to American customers. Every month, without a deal, removes another layer of protection from Canadian workers.
How many corporate welfare agencies do the Trudeau-Carney Liberals need to create before they learn that it doesn't work? They have the Canada Infrastructure Fund. Remember the Infrastructure Bank? Remember that was going to invest in all these projects? What happened with that? There's a new defense industry bank. There's the Canada Growth Fund, and countless other departmental agencies that Liberals have created and grown over the last decade to give us the worst investment and growth.
Hamilton, Sault Ste. Marie, Windsor, and other manufacturing communities are being exposed to a crisis created in Ottawa. Steel producers warned the government that its measures were not enough and that mass layoffs could follow. Algoma Steel has already faced serious pressure. Carney talks about defending Canada, but his negotiating strategy leaves workers standing alone while Washington tightens the rules around the market they depend on.
And that's why you gotta call Chapter. The number is 877-204-0194. Again, that is 877-204-0194. Get the data, Get the facts. We love facts on the channel. Get it right and call chapter today. You gotta call him, guys.
The United States has also expanded its demands because Carney kept adding new disputes. Washington reportedly wants greater access to Canada's protected dairy market, an end to provincial bans on American liquor, changes to online streaming rules, and guarantees that Canada will stop retaliating. Ottawa created irritants during a trade fight and then acted surprised when the U.S. demanded that every irritant be removed.
Far from elbows up. It looks like Canada has no elbows at all. This is the Prime Minister who has already apologized to Trump once.
Carney's digital services tax was a perfect example. Canada tried to introduce a new charge affecting major American technology companies while trade negotiations were already unstable. Washington objected, talks stalled, and Carney dropped the tax. He gained no major breakthrough in exchange. The lesson for the U.S. was obvious. Apply enough pressure and Ottawa will retreat without receiving meaningful protection for Canadian industry. The pattern repeated with retaliatory tariffs. Carney threatened new measures, paused them when Washington escalated, and later removed several tariffs on American goods. Once again, Canada gave something up and received little in return. A serious negotiator trades concessions for concessions. Carney appears to offer concessions simply to get officials back into the room. That is why Canada's protected position is disappearing so quickly.
Carney is happily smiling as he travels to the United States for the FIFA World Cup in New Jersey, unquote. Then the kicker, quote, even your PM is doing it, unquote. 239,000 views. That's not an attack ad, friends. That's a citizen holding up a mirror, and the whole elbows up act is what got reflected back.
Even Carney's appearance beside the American president at the World Cup exposed how weak the elbows up performance had become. He sat smiling in a private suite while fresh tariffs and possible damages were publicly floated over Canadian wildfire smoke. Carney had built his brand on resistance, yet when the pressure arrived in person, he said nothing and returned home with another threat hanging over Canada. That tariff threat may have sounded unusual, but it revealed the deeper problem. Washington now believes Canada can be pressured on almost any issue because Ottawa has repeatedly shown it will fold. Wildfire smoke, steel, aluminum, dairy, streaming rules, liquor restrictions, digital taxes, and auto production can all become bargaining tools. Once special trust disappears, every disagreement becomes an opportunity for new penalties.
Somebody out there will say, hold on, Canada co-hosted this tournament. Of course the PM shows up to the final. And that only makes it worse. On the very stage Canada helped build in front of the entire planet, the President of the United States used the moment to muse about finding us, while the country back home is on fire.
Canada's energy security is also tied directly to American protection. For nearly a century, the two countries built an integrated oil and gas system. Canadian producers gained access to the world's largest nearby market, while American refineries received reliable energy from a stable neighbor. Pipelines, contracts, refineries, railways, and power systems grew around that relationship. Carney is now risking it without having a replacement.
That they have been trying to destroy Canada's oil industry on purpose, saying Canada would be more poor if we had invested in the oil industry. And now they don't want to help with the current price pressure at all. And Mark Carney continues to go out of his way to make sure that Canada and the US are separated, and Canada continues to be antagonistic.
Ottawa talks constantly about diversification, but Canada still lacks enough pipelines, ports, LNG terminals, and overseas contracts to replace American demand. Diversification should mean increasing production and adding customers while preserving the U.S. market. Carney instead treats the existing relationship as something Canada can weaken before alternatives are ready. That leaves Canadian energy exposed if Washington decides to reduce cooperation or impose tougher terms. Some Canadian voices have suggested using oil and gas as leverage against the United States. That would be economic suicide. Most Canadian energy exports still move south, and provincial revenues depend heavily on those sales. Restricting supply would hurt Alberta, Saskatchewan, workers, producers, and taxpayers before it seriously damaged the U.S. Canada would be destroying its own income while pretending it was exercising power.
Borrowing yet another $25 billion out of the economy to subsidize projects that the government still cannot figure out how to approve will only cost hardworking Canadians. Multinational corporations get the profit, taxpayers will get the loss.
The United States also provides Canada with a wider security umbrella that Ottawa rarely admits. Continental air defense, intelligence sharing, military interoperability, border coordination, and American defense capacity all make Canada safer. Yet, Carney speaks as though Washington is mainly a threat, while Canada's own forces remain badly under-equipped. A country cannot insult the power protecting its continent and assume that cooperation will remain politically untouched forever. Canada recently claimed it had finally reached the NATO spending benchmark, but critics argued the number relied on creative accounting rather than real capability. Much of the military's equipment remains old, delayed, or unavailable. Rebuilding could take many years. Carney celebrates a percentage, while Canada still depends heavily on American systems, technology, aircraft, intelligence, and logistics. That dependency makes his confrontation even more reckless.
I guess that's what happens when you get a banker in charge of your country. But one of the ways it looks like this is going to be happening is Canada talking about the immense amount of natural resources that they have, focusing to becoming an energy superpower of North America. You can
Yeah, this is the other thing. He just takes everything at face value. Like, we're going to be an energy superpower, sure.
This does not mean Washington has formally ended every defense arrangement with Canada. The references do not support that claim, but the political protection surrounding those arrangements is clearly being weakened. When trust declines, cooperation becomes more transactional. Canada may face higher costs, fewer favors, stricter conditions, and less patience. Carney is turning a deeply integrated partnership into a relationship where America asks what Canada is offering first.
What you know, which is that we are not engaged in these actions of the U.S. and Israel. We're not engaged in offensive actions, and we will not be engaged in those actions.
Because he refuses to support the U.S.
The China issue could accelerate that shift. Ottawa is exploring closer commercial ties with Beijing, including possible Chinese electric vehicles and components entering Canada. Washington will not allow Canada to become a backdoor for Chinese products into the American market. Vehicles assembled in Canada with Chinese parts, ownership, or subsidies could still be treated as Chinese goods and blocked or heavily tariffed. That would place the entire Canadian auto sector at risk. The U.S. could tighten rules of origin, examine ownership structures, restrict battery components, and reject products that fail new security tests. Canadian factories would then be caught between Ottawa's China strategy and Washington's determination to protect American manufacturing. Carney may call this diversification, but workers could experience it as closed plants and lost shifts.
Canadian-made autos are subject to a 25% tariff. Okay, folks.
The damage would not stop with vehicles. Steel, aluminum, batteries, critical minerals, technology, telecommunications, and infrastructure could all face closer scrutiny if Washington believes Canada is helping China bypass American restrictions. The special assumption that Canadian goods are trusted could disappear. Every shipment would face more questions, more paperwork, more inspections, and more political risk. That is what losing American protection looks like in practice. Carney also weakened Canada by failing to build major projects at home. Pipelines, LNG facilities, mines, transmission lines, and export terminals remain trapped in years of review. Ottawa announces agreements to discuss future agreements, then presents them as construction progress. Investors hear the speeches but still cannot get clear answers about emissions rules, carbon taxes, production limits, timelines, and Indigenous consultation. When Canada delays, the United States benefits. Capital moves to jurisdictions where approvals are faster and rules are clearer. Factories are built south of the border. Energy projects attract American financing. Skilled workers follow the jobs. Washington does not need to formally cut Canada off from investment protection. Ottawa's uncertainty is already pushing investment away, while American tariffs make the movement even faster. Carney's economic claims cannot hide this problem. Ottawa points to forecasts, government subsidies, and publicly supported projects as proof that Canada is growing. But forecasts are not completed results, and taxpayer money circulating between subsidized companies is not the same as private investors choosing Canada. Real protection comes from confidence. Carney has replaced confidence with press conferences, temporary rebates, and political slogans.
Theirs, and it's going to be very embarrassing on the Canadian side. But the politicians and the media's lies and manipulation keeps working, because even though they were just lying yet again today,
ordinary Canadians are already paying for that collapse in confidence. Young workers struggle to find interviews. Manufacturing communities fear layoffs. Food banks face growing demand. Housing remains unaffordable. Carney offers temporary benefits and claims the country is moving forward, but none of those measures replace lost industrial access to the United States. A grocery payment cannot repair a steel mill that loses its market. The most damaging part is that Canada had an extraordinary position before Carney's confrontation. It shared the world's longest peaceful border with the largest economy on Earth. Canadian companies enjoyed integrated supply chains, reliable customers, defense cooperation, and a level of market access other countries spent decades trying to obtain. Carney treated that position as weakness instead of recognizing it as Canada's greatest strategic advantage. He wanted to prove Canada could challenge Washington, move closer to China, demand special treatment, and still keep every American benefit. That calculation has failed. The U.S. is now attaching conditions to trade, threatening new tariffs, limiting industrial access, and demanding concessions across multiple sectors. Canada is discovering that protection was based on trust and mutual value, not geography alone.
Let's ask some basic questions. Who will get the money? Small and medium-sized businesses? Of course not. It will be the billionaires and bankers that will go to Mark Carney's elite summit coming up in September. They will again get rich, making everyone else poor. That guarantees small businesses and entrepreneurs get shut out, and politically powerful corporations get carve-outs, handouts, and bailouts.
Washington does not need to abandon Canada completely to create panic. It only needs to remove one privilege at a time. A quota on steel, a tariff on aluminum, a barrier against Canadian autos, a restriction on Chinese-linked products, less procurement, tighter border checks, fewer investment guarantees, more expensive defense cooperation. Each step makes Canada weaker while reminding Ottawa how much protection it once received automatically. That is why the crisis is directly tied to Mark Carney. He inherited a difficult relationship, but he chose to make confrontation his political identity. He added trade irritants, encouraged economic separation before alternatives existed, moved toward China, delayed projects, and then surrendered whenever the pressure intensified. Canada is not losing American protection because of one sudden decision. It is losing it through Carney's repeated failures.
Are you doing anything to defend the ICC? And why haven't you spoken up for the Canadian judge under American sanctions?
Well, first, Canada is a proud member of the International Criminal Court. We support it with funding, we support it with personnel, we support it with our values, we support it with our actions.
The U.S. is showing Canada that access, trust, security, and economic shelter are not unconditional. Carney acted as though America would keep protecting Canadian industries, while Ottawa attacked American policy and searched for ways around American power. Now, those protections are being stripped away, sector by sector. Canada is in panic mode because it finally understands the truth. Without the U.S. partnership, Ottawa has no immediate backup plan.